Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so excited to be launching my first episode, and I'm grateful for everyone who is tuning in right now. This is literally just my raw ass series, talking with raw ass people who just want to join me in talking about how doomed we are in this world. So, so everyone who knows me knows that I'm raw. I've been doing a lot of social media, intellectual work, and theoretical work in the public sphere as a form of organizing. And so I'm so happy today to be, I'm sorry, because I'm gonna be extra. Only is this person one of my favorite people, my best friend, but literally they are my teacher. And so it is such an honor to be in conversation with my teacher. Need I remind you all, the Lambda Literary Award for Belly of the Beast, the politics of anti-blackness as anti-blackness by the Deshaun Harrison. They, them pronouns. So I just want to give you a moment to, introduce yourself, but also just to settle into the space and get ready to do what we do.
Yes, I love you. Thank you for a very generous introduction. Y'all, I got wine with me. Ignore the Band-Aid. It's an injury, but it's okay. I got wine with me. We're going to be drinking. We're going to be sipping. We're going to have fun. It's going to be a cute conversation, but a relaxed one. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Rob, for having me like your first guest.
You are my first guest, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Before we get started, just want to remind you all to like and subscribe. Click the button below if you are wanting to rock with us longer, wanting to see more of the projects that we do, some more of the conversations. And if you get something from this conversation and want to know more, I'll be posting links to my social media, so you can just follow us on social media, because we do a lot of this work in the public sphere. So like, subscribe, whatever you do. So first, I want to just give y'all a little background information very briefly, and then we're going to jump into it. Deshaun and I have known each other since undergrad, and
it's been a long time.
A long time. It's been close, almost a decade. I think it's about almost a decade. Yeah, and we're student organizers. Not the student organizers that's advocating for better rights at the schools. Student organizers that are like, Morehouse, Clark, and Lambda Spelman should not exist. So. A cute little organizing group called AUC Shut It Down. And I met Deshaun through this student organizing group. And I just remember we cling to each other the most because we had a shared interest in the Black church. That brings us to this conversation today, where we're going to get into the Black church, and specifically the Black pastor in Brooklyn who was robbed in the middle of service on live stream. And he was robbed for over, I think they said $400,000 worth of jewelry. Following that conversation, a gospel pundit, which is what I like to call him, Larry Reed, a gospel pundit, Larry Reed, did an Instagram live with him and the pastor who got robbed, and they got into a confrontation. Sorry, with another Black woman. I didn't catch her name because I watched the clip and kept moving. No shade, but it is what it is. So in this conversation, in this exchange, the Black pastor who got robbed, said some queerphobic slurs, also shamed a Black woman, kept calling her fat and all of those things. And if you haven't watched it, you can just Google it, YouTube it, the clip is there. Larry Reed. I didn't want to show a clip here because I'm not trying to give them a free promo. So anyways, all that to say, we are going to talk all things Black church, but before we get started, I want Deshaun to just give us a kind of synopsis of your relationship to the Black church, some of the things that you had to deconstruct in relationship to your faith, right? Or the faith that you had to come out of, and how that plays into the intersections of gender, race, and class.
LOL, Angela Davis. Yeah, so I was born and raised in the Bible Belt. For those who don't know, I'm from North Carolina, from very much like the East Coast of North Carolina. And so I grew up in a small town that's growing into like a bigger city now, because it's a college city. But I was born and raised there, lived there for 18 years, and it was the type of place where we were in church just about every day of the week, right? Where we were at Bible study, we were at all of the choir rehearsals, at the board meetings, Sunday school, Sunday morning service, evening service, right? Like that was the place that I come from. My Nana is a preacher. My Nana's sister, my aunt, is a preacher. My mom was a teen preacher. And for a while, I was also like leading praise and worship. I was on the choir. I was praise dancing. I was preaching. I was teaching Sunday school. So I had like a very intimate relationship with the Black church for a long time. And then when I got to college, I went to Morehouse, for those who don't know. My entire worldview changed, but it didn't change overnight, right? So like, I had a professor by the name of Dr. Daniel Black, who now I adore, but at the time, like I was like, this is not what I come from. Like, this is not what I know God to be. And so as I started to have more classes with Dr. Black and Dr. Parker, I developed like a much deeper relationship with myself that would eventually lead me away from the Black church. And I say with myself, but myself also represents a deeper relationship with other Black folks, right? Who were outside of the church, who were queer and trans students, who were like the Black folks in the hood who had no interest in church, right? I was born and raised in the projects, but there are Black folks in the hood who have an interest in the church, and there are Black folks in the hood who have zero interest in the church. And those are the folks that I was getting more acquainted with, folks who made community, who were part of community, who formed community in a way that I had never been a part of before, or at least rather in a way that I had never opened myself up to being a part of before. So that has been like a really quick synopsis of my relationship with the Black church and God before I just decided altogether that I had no interest in being a Christian and being part of the Black church. And while I do not identify myself as an atheist or as agnostic, I am not affiliated with any religious or spiritual practices outside of the ones I developed for myself.
I love that. And you actually just set us up to get to the heart of this conversation. So you talk about, being in this position where, there are Black people in the hood who go to church and Black people in the hood who don't. But I also want to add a caveat to what you said, which is that just even the Black people who don't go to church are still living under the ethical system of Christianity, which is why they are positioned in the way that they are, right? It is because Christian ethics is over-determining Black space, period, right, that Black ethics, how we understand to be what is right and what is wrong, right, is tailored toward church ethics, Christian
Absolutely.
ethics, and even for people who don't go to church, right? And which is why we can be looking at this moment with a Black pastor who, is in church preaching a sermon, what is positioned to be God's house, and we'll get there, right? And then people can walk into the church and rob this pastor for $400,000 worth of jewelry, and the public outcry be a little bit divided, right? But overwhelmingly agree upon the fact that robbing anybody in God's house is unethical, right? And so because that is the ethical system, that framework of what is ethical, right? What is right, what is wrong, and not that ethics is about the sum total of right and wrong, but for the sake of having this conversation, trying to have a moral claim on what is right and what is wrong is over-determined, right, by these people who are coming to rob a pastor that is preaching in $400,000 worth of jewelry in a poor area in Brooklyn.
Right.
Right? Because that's key, in a poor area in Brooklyn.
Right.
And so because we could do our thing all day, right? But I kind of want to turn to the comment sections on this story, right? And just read out to you some of the things that were said about this incident from the people, because they don't like to talk to us because they say we got church hurt. So we're gonna throw the baton to the people, okay? The people who go to church. So some of the things that come up in the comment section is that when they saw this pastor attacking this fat Black woman, right, and attacking Larry Reed, called him the F word, the slur, right, called him all of these things. There was someone in the comments, one of the things that said, well, he should have got robbed. Right? This is somebody in the comment, not me, it's not Roz, not Deshawn, this is the comment section. So he said he should have got robbed, right? So I want to know, what are your thoughts on hearing people, church-going people, say that this was a justified act in the house of God?
Well, for one, I want to say that from the story that I read, it wasn't that he was necessarily preaching in $400,000 worth of jewelry, but that he was stolen from, his family was stolen from, and some of the people in the church were also stolen from, and that amounted to $400,000. However, what does feel clear to me is I saw the clip, and what he was wearing, absolutely to me, was a significant amount of money in jewelry. Periods. I just want to say it wasn't just him. Sure, it wasn't just him, but he was looking a very particular way. Even in the Instagram live or whatever live that happened between him, Larry Reed, and the pastor that they were talking to, the other pastor. So I wanted to start there. But to me, I think it's interesting that church-going folk, right, are saying that this is a justified act, something that should have happened in the house of God, particularly because I think that, I know that I agree, right? I think that, like, of course, these are four people who are armed, and I would never, irrespective of like my ideological difference, I would never choose to want to see a bunch of Black folks be gunned down, especially by other Black folks, while in their place of worship. That can be problematized later on, but so I guess I won't say never. More often than not, I would not want to see that. But what I think is also true is that it is a justified act because, like you said, he's doing this in an area in Brooklyn, of all places, that is poor, right? And we know historically and presently the ways that pastors have stolen from their congregations, the ways that pastors have accumulated wealth through the means of, or the non-means of, their congregants. And so I think that to hear church-going folks say that means that there is something about this event that is special. And to me, what that really is saying is that what's special is that it is something that has been sensationalized through social media. Because church-going folk are fully aware, in more cases than not, that they are being stolen from, or that there are pastors in the world who are corrupt, even if they believe that it's not their pastors. What separates this pastor from theirs is that he, and this moment that he endured, is being publicized in the world, that the world now has eyes on this pastor and is able to offer commentary. So they have to have some sort of understanding that what's happening to him is different. And I think that that's why there are some folks who are leading to this, or rather who are arriving at this understanding that it's okay, that it's justified. I don't think that that is indicative of a growing consciousness in the church. I think that that is indicative of the difference between sensationalism and things that are hidden.
That is a brilliant intervention. And the reason why it is for me in particular is because to the extent that, there were people who felt that way, like this was a justified act, right? There was also a growing sector that felt like, the church is off limits.
Right.
You settle your beef outside of the church, right? And I think I want to, put on the table that what I was gathering from this public outcry is that it functioned as a kind of haunting, right? That the possibility that God's house is not off limits, right? Now, we know that is true considering the racial history of America, right? We know that white people will walk into churches and kill Black people, and God's house, whatever God's house is for us, is never off limits for them, right? But we also know that in the Black church, if God's house is off limits, God's people are not off limits, right? That God's people can be tortured, can be harassed, right? I mean, we saw with this pastor. I mean, we talk about pastoral care,
right?
And what does it mean for you for this pastor to get, and I don't know his name, but this pastor to get on Instagram live and tell a Black woman, you fat, you this, you that, and tell a Black man, you're fat, you're F word, all that other stuff, right? But to pastor queer and fat people in your church. Right? So like the people are never off limits.
Right.
When it comes down to acts of violence, right? And so now we see a moment that serves as what I say is a haunting, because there's a possibility for retaliation that does not fit within the framework of Christian ethics, even if this beef was personal, right? I mean, I would say it does fit in the framework of Christian ethics if we understand Christian ethics to be Christian imperialism, but people don't like to consider that, right? So if we think of Christian ethics as something that is pacifist, right, which is without violence, then we're now entering a different type of framework of what does it mean for church people to now be talking out about this particular act amidst a viral Kim Burrell moment, right? Amidst a viral TD Jakes moment, where once again people are victims of anti-Black desirability and misogyny, right? Misogynoir to be precise. But amidst these two viral moments, what does it mean now for people to be erring on the side of those whose ethics function a little bit differently, to say there's a possibility that people might retaliate?
Right.
I mean, Future, we don't like Future very much, but he says in his new album, his opening song, you think a nigga like me give a F about a nigga shooting up the church? I got to take it up with God, because I'm a God on this earth. And I'm like, he might have ate that up. He might have ate that up. So I'm going to ask you, because this was another comment that came out of the comment section in conversation with what I just said. Someone said, don't worry about this moment because your sheep will buy you more jewelry.
And they will. And they will. I have no doubt. We go to churches where pastors are getting their 10th, 15th, 25th, 75th anniversary celebration, right? Where people are literally bringing gifts to their pastors, like their pastors are kings and queens. So I wholeheartedly believe that. I wholeheartedly believe that his sheep, and I love that word. I wholeheartedly believe that his sheep will buy him more jewelry.
Why do you love that word, Nation?
I love that word. I love that word. I think that Christians use that so unironically, but it's so ironic because I think that they will buy him more jewelry, even if only through offering and their tithes, right? He will have more jewelry. They won't. They will have more trauma and he will have more jewelry. And I believe that to be true.
And I know that to be true.
I know that to be true. And I think that to your point, right, there is something intentional about the ways that pastors, let me rewind. I think that I haven't listened to Future's album, so I didn't know that was something that he said. But I do think that he made several points, right? And I think that more Christians actually support and believe in that line than would admit it, right? And I think we know that because, to your point, the people are not off limits.
Right.
Right? Every Sunday, pastors do go into their churches and shoot up books in their churches and call it justified.
Period.
Because for them and to their God, it is. Right? It's just in the clip that I saw where this pastor is talking to the woman pastor and Larry Reed, right? He is literally about to justify to Larry Reed why it is okay for him to believe that homosexuality is an abomination. He uses this language precisely. Why it is okay for him to believe that, to preach that is something that is justified, that is taught to him by God, while also naming that he had immense respect for Larry Reed before this rambling that Larry Reed went on about the incident that happened to him, right? To them, they don't see rhetorical violence as violence.
Exactly.
To them, they don't see this form of communication wherein you are telling people that are sitting in your church that they are damned to a life of gnawed teeth, right? Burning skin, right? Mark of the beast and all these things, right? They don't understand that as something that too is violent, as though that does not also have trauma.
As something that doesn't materialize as poverty, as gender.
Right.
Like those are not metaphorical. Those things have ontological states, right?
Precisely. But they don't believe that or understand that too to be violent. And so it is why he's able to sit on live and call this pastor Biggie, right? He called her right. Biggie as if to say that she looks like Biggie Smalls, right? The notorious B.I.G., because she was a fat woman. And also call Larry Reed the F slur, while also representing himself as a pastor and his church as their leader. Mm. That's a possibility because rhetorical violence is not violent. That's a possibility because it's okay to shoot up the church and its congregants, so long as it's done so in the name of God.
Right.
So if Future can take it up with God, so can they, right? Because right. God is in fact telling them to do that. Kim Burrell is justified in telling people that they are ugly, that they don't get to like determine that truth telling, and by truth telling, she means telling somebody that they're ugly, is justified because that's what her God is telling her to do. And her God is telling her that is okay.
Right.
Because they get to be violent, and that form of violence is in their mind separated from state violence, is in their mind separated from this ontological violence, is in their mind separated from this metaphysical violence, right? It is separate from what we understand to be anti-blackness.
What we understand to be spiritual principalities and wickedness in high places.
Right.
Right.
It is, and in many ways, it is also separate from, while simultaneously is in conversation with, or is happening with, the long suffering that's required of the Black Christian.
A fruit of the Spirit. Now, ate the girls up, okay?
It's required, right? And so Kim Burrell, I don't actually know what happened with TD Jakes. You have to inform me, but Kim Burrell and this other pastor get to express themselves in such ways. And if not for a camera being present, and if not for the power of social media for people who are not invested in, but are still condemned by these practices, these people would be able to do these things with no pushback and have no remorse, as they still don't, because that is a part of what it means to be part of the Black church. And it is especially a part of what it means to be a leader in the Black church. That's your commitment.
Exactly. And more importantly, in addition to that, there is a theological consensus that God is coterminous with violence.
Right.
Whether or not we want to put how we want to sanitize that, right? There's power in the blood.
Wonders working blood.
Wondrous working power. Okay? Like there's power. And it's interesting how you like the language signifies, right? It literally signifies something that lives in everyone's subconscious. It's like we know what this is, but there is and this is really your work where you get up under desirability, but there is a desirability that comes with the type of pastors that people pick, right, that people don't want to acknowledge, right? Like the proximity one has to being the spiritual daughter of this patriarch is a kind of social currency, right? In which assumes that they are actually receiving pastoral care. I mean, half of TD Jakes' congregants probably cannot get in contact with him, probably is in contact with multiple deacons and ministers who do what TD Jakes does not have the time to do, right? But yet he still benefits as their spiritual covering, right? And so there's an interesting way in which the pastors that people pick are structuring their desires, right? What they want to be covered by, what they want to be shepherded by. And I just want to hear, your thoughts around that, and we'll kind of close on this point.
Yeah, this is good. So I think that,
which also informs why there are not many people who want women pastors, right? So
right, absolutely.
Right.
I think that there is a commitment, right, an unspoken, perhaps unintelligible, perhaps unconscious commitment that folks have by way of anti-Blackness, right, to prioritizing pastors who are believed to be a reflection of God. And what that means is that, yes, your pastor is supposed to be a man, a cis man. Your pastor is supposed to be heterosexual, right? Your pastor is supposed to have money because that is a reflection of God. God cannot be poor. If God is poor, then why am I serving him, right? Your pastor has to either be thin or must be committed to health, and therefore an understanding that fatness is harmful, right? Understanding that gluttony is a sin, right? These are commitments that people are committed to, and these are things that people are looking at as they seek out pastors, as they seek out spiritual leaders, right? Your pastor has to have a particular connection to people who are like you, but also be able to be a symbol for what you hope to one day be in terms of social mobility, which is to say that your pastor is supposed to provide you hope, not only through what he says, but also through the life that he lives, right, and has lived. And so I think that, yes, right, it is like desirability is at the heart of everything, but in this case, it's at the heart of not only like the pastor that we choose, but the church that we choose, right? The people in that church that we choose, the leadership that comes from that church, the teachings that come from that church. If anti-Blackness structures all of this, and anti-Blackness is an unconscious decision, right? Or one that lives in the libidinal economy. If we take Sexton and Wilderson seriously, which I know that both of us do, if anti-Blackness is structured in this way, and if anti-Blackness structures the world and everything in it, then it also over-determines who and what we find desirable and why then we choose to follow them. And that choice to follow them is determined entirely by their ability to represent God in the flesh.
This is such, we're doomed, but this is this is such a profound moment for me, because thank you. I have figured it out what I am antagonized by in theology. This is it. Like, everything that you named about a pastor has to mimic richness and not poorness, thinness and not fatness, male, not non-men, right? Like, a pastor has to represent everything that is in proximity to death.
Right.
The pastor has to represent the opposite of everything that is in proximity to death, right? The pastor has to stand in for what you named as the possibility of everything that is not death, which is essential to the Christological story, right? Jesus conquers death.
Yes.
It is the desire for resurrection that is at the heart. And the grave, yes. Okay? That structures desirability.
Yes.
And I think this is such a profound moment, because we do all the theological language around the Imago Dei, to be created in the image of God, and this should be something that we are pursuing. But I think, to your point about anti-Blackness, and I don't want to get too heady, but I do want to stress this point about this hysteria around not being ontologically dead. Right. Not being a figure or a representation of what it means to die, right? Always having to be in pursuit of the resurrection, right, is the very thing that antagonizes our ability to deal with violence.
Right. It also is it is oxymoronic in how it functions, right?
Right.
Because you are supposed to be always in pursuit of the resurrection, in pursuit of that who has been resurrected, while also always being committed to following those who are far away from death, right? Because if Christ conquered death, hell, and the grave, then who I'm following does not have to die. But the ideology that I must be committed to is one of death. And so in life, right,
yes,
I have to be committed to all those who are opposite of or not adjacent to what I understand to be death. But I cannot understand Christ to be someone who is actually a representation of those I understand to be dead, or those I understand to represent death, right? So Christ cannot be a representation of transness, of queerness, of women, of poverty, of Blackness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, the person, I have to understand that if Christ died, I must be in pursuit of the one who has been resurrected, understanding that he came to earth to die.
And not just that he came to earth to die, but when God wraps God's self in flesh, and I'm no theologian here, right? So don't drag me. But when God wraps God's self in flesh and comes to earth, this is actually what drew me to womanism. By way of Stacey Floyd Thomas. Let me clarify. Womanism by way of Stacey Floyd Thomas, which is positioned as womanist ethics, right? She said something in class one day that was like, the womanist question is a question of theodicy, right? Is a question of the vindication of evil, because she says, Mary is the one who asks God, was there any other way to take on the sins of the world than killing my baby? Right? And she's like, that's where the womanist question begins for her. It is it's at the moment of theodicy, right? It's where one is questioning and asking God, was there any way to conquer the world than through my son? And it's like, well, the answer to that question we know is no, right?
No, right.
Absolutely not. Because the only way that one can understand oneself to be God is if they conquer death. Right. And so to be positioned as Black people, ones who never, not only, I mean, in a way, right, we can look at it as not conquering death, but having to live our deaths daily, right? So to be intimately in kind of a necromancy with death in a particular way, right? Because like,
just not conquering.
We don't have to conquer it because we are it. We stand in for it paradigmatically, right? One only knows themselves to be alive because they're not Black. Right. Right. And so, yeah, I think that's just, it's such a brilliant point, because that is something that in this moment that we see with this pastor who is in some way, all of the surrounding moment is a demonstration, right? But what happens when this demonstration becomes like a real situation? Because some people believe that it was staged, right? There's still some people who believe that this moment was staged. But if we take it as a real moment, what does it mean for the pastor to get in close proximity to death, but then the robbers choose, which is something that people outside of the church can't normally say, right? Because a lot of people get robbed and get killed. Right. Right. But the pastor still gets to live and see another day, and then put an insurance claim out on all the jewelry that was taken. Which is a question of, what does it actually mean to have life? Right. And he can't answer that himself, right? I think that he would like to, and he can't. And I think that, I know we can't go too deep in this here, but I love the question. I love what you just brought up with Mary. I think that is a very brilliant point, because I imagine, right? Of course, we can talk about the time of like or rather the culture of that time period and all of the things, right? But I imagine that this is a mom who, one, never had the choice in whether or not she would become a mom, but got acquainted with what it meant to be a mother, and was also told by the same person, thing, man, spirit, that forced her into being a mother, that her child that was forced onto her or into her would be killed. Mm-hmm. And I think that, to me, that feels very important, because it feels like another story in the Bible wherein death, even if by another name, is central to what it means to serve God. And yet you must be committed to life, right? And I think that I just think that is such an important thing to really sit with, because what does it mean to be committed to life, be committed to living, if what your God has shown you in every way, right? And people are going to say, well, New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament and Old Testament, right? If what your God has shown you is that in order to be a committed servant, right? Someone who is actually committed to serving him, you must also be committed to death. How do you find life in death? And I think the answer is through being Black. Exactly. Right. Through the slave. Exactly. I think we find life through death by being Black. And I think that more of us have to have a deeper understanding of what it means to live in the contradiction of anti-Blackness, because that is the contradiction of anti-Blackness. That is what it means to find life in death. It means to be the slave. It means to be Black, right? And what that means
is that it doesn't matter how committed you are to your church, to your pastor, right? Or to your ideology that's leading you to this church or this pastor, that you are not separated from what it means to be Black and therefore to be life as death, which is why foreign gunmen can show up inside of a church and threaten the lives of other Black folks around them to rob them of their jewelry. Because to be Black is to always be dead and also always be in proximity to death. That is just the bottom line. I think that a lot of times people are not as, I'll rephrase. I think that a lot of times many of us know that to be true, and are not, and don't desire to honor that truth or to admit that truth. But we just watched, right? All of these Black folks, all these Black folks who were killed by these different mass murders in the last couple of months. We know the amount of Black folks who are murdered by police a year. We know how many Black folks are living in poverty. We know how these pandemics that we're living in have directly harmed Black folks, right? We know all these things about the ways that Black folks cannot escape death. And we refuse to admit that so much about that is because of the illogics of anti-Blackness, which sets us up as people who must always be dead, right? And be in proximity to death. And so we look to follow life, someone who represents what it means to live, in our church leaders, in our pastors, even though the man that we say that they, us, whatever, that we say we're in search of, that we're looking to actually follow, the man who is supposed to be the foundation of the ideology in which we follow, we know that he is a representation of death. And as is everyone else around him. I just wanted to say that to invite us into the contradiction of anti-Blackness and invite us into the understanding that anti-Blackness has no logic. And that's why we live in the contradiction of Blackness and anti-Blackness.
I love you more than anything in this world. Thank you so much. Mic drop. Mic drop, you know? I mean, yes. And so thank you all for coming and tuning in with us. Thank you for sharing. And this is church. This is church, okay? Y'all just went to church, okay? So that means that you have to abolish us, okay? If this is So thank y'all for tuning in and just sitting with us, thinking through these things, being present, and you know, the pop culture of it all. And Deshawn, just thank you for your work. Like, you are essential. You are essential to the conversation. And so there is no way to have this conversation without your work. There's just no way. I love you. I love you. I love you. So thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see y'all later. Bye.